Hello, it's Concord Wind. I prepared a passage of God's words to read. God says, "Today we have fellowshipped about the three characteristics of dispositional change. Summarize those three characteristics." Then a brother or sister, someone in the fellowship with God said, "The first characteristic is the ability to accept and submit to things that are right and then conform to the truth." Evaluating myself based on this first characteristic. Let's read again. The first characteristic is the ability to accept and submit to things that are right and that conform to the truth. Some examples I can think of in my life. There's I don't use foul language typically. It's very rare that very rare. Like maybe once every few years I might use a foul word. And it's very rare that I use foul language. But there was one word in my vocabulary that I used. I won't say what it was. But an old friend of mine, he's not a friend anymore, but he used to be a friend, and he said, you really shouldn't use that word. And my first reaction was to defend it, I defended myself at first, and then after I thought about it, I thought, you know what? That word is inappropriate, I think. I'll stop using it. And so I stopped using it, And that's an example of like the principle in that, the first time I heard of the principle that I used in that situation was from the brother above, also known as the man used by the Holy Spirit. He said, it doesn't matter if the truth comes from this elderly person or this little child. If what they say is the truth, or if what they say conforms to the truth, I will accept it and submit to it, And then there's an Odinist saying that goes, accept wisdom regardless of the source. And that's in line with what the brother above said, Basically, if something is in line with the truth, it doesn't matter what the source is of that, opinion or knowledge, philosophy, information, whatever it is. Like, if it's in line with the truth, if it's like an aphorism or whatever, you must accept it and submit to it. It's not the case that we only accept and submit to God's words. We accept and submit to all words that are in line with the truth, no matter who they come from. Like there's people who won't accept something in line with the truth if it comes from somebody they don't like, especially like in the political arena. You see that a lot. And that's unfortunate because we grow and learn and we develop and progress from accepting the truth and accepting what's in line with the truth, The second characteristic is the ability to seek the truth and put it into practice when something happens to you, and to not handle matters based on your own will. I'm very familiar with God's words, So it's not always the case. Like, I often will search in God's words when something happens to me, but a lot of times I can't find anything. So in the event that you seek the truth, but you're unable to find a principle that corresponds to your situation, you must rely on God. which is a principle found in God's words. The greatest wisdom is to rely on God. And how do you rely on God? It's through prayer. That's how you look up to God and rely on God is through prayer. So when something happens to you and you can't find the corresponding principle in God's words, that obviously relate to your situation. That's why it's corresponding. If you can't find a principle that relates to your situation in God's words, then guess what? You need to pray. You need to rely on God. Ask Him to help you in the situation. Ask Him to guide you and enlighten you in the situation. And that's a principle I found in God's words that I put into practice quite often. Like when it comes to my duty, I'm constantly praying for God to help me with my duty, help me with music, help me with my sermons, to guide and lead me and to enlighten me and to give me the words to say and to give me the ability and so, all right, let's look at the third characteristic. So the third characteristic is the ability to show consideration for God's intentions, to rebel against the flesh and achieve submission to God, no matter what befalls you. And that's really interesting, because I am very considerate of God's intentions. That's why I do this. I do my duty for the sake of God's intentions. And rebelling against the flesh is a temporary state. Because there are certain desires of the flesh that just kind of go away after you've practiced the truth for so long. But like when I wanted to get married for so long, so many years I wanted to get married, and my back is killing me. Ugh. So when I realized that I worshipped marriage, and marriage was the idol of my heart, when I realized that, when God showed me that, I began rebelling against my flesh very naturally, because I saw that worshiping marriage was a foolish endeavor, and I guess worshiping women is an endeavor, but pursuing marriage before pursuing the truth was a foolish endeavor, and I did work hard to find a wife, so it was very foolish, especially when we have the knowledge that marriage is arranged by God, and if God determines that you will marry someone, it doesn't matter how hard you look, or if you don't look at all, like you will. God will, arrange for you to meet that person, and you'll get married regardless of any effort you put in or a lack of effort. You know what I mean? So, yeah. It's very silly to chase marriage and chase women. It's just very silly. So I rebelled against the flesh, and it was a back and forth struggle, because I'd be like, yeah, I'm giving up on marriage. I'd post on Facebook, I'm giving up on marriage. And then later on, I messaged my ex and asked her if she had any single friends that were looking to get married, and it's like, dang, I'm still it was kind of a tough battle, but it started to become more natural for me to just not pursue marriage. It started to become more natural because, and the changes didn't happen overnight. It was a process. There was a battle and a conflict within myself of just understanding the truth and seeing that the truth is true, in my mind, and justifying the truth, and seeing the logical fallacy in pursuing marriage. And, that battle in my mind, took place, and I basically had to be convinced not to pursue marriage, and I had to convince myself based off of God's words and based off of my experience and God's arrangements, and submission to God, because it says to rebel against the flesh and achieve submission to God no matter what befalls you. Submission to God isn't a lot of times my first reaction when something happens to me. Like recently, I was praying for God to help me write some songs that will really touch people or help people. I told God I just want to be edifying towards people, and I worked on a song. My back. I worked on a song, and by the time it was like a finished product, like I wasn't happy with the result, so I reworked it and still wasn't happy with the result, so I scrapped it and moved on to a new project. And when that project was finished, I wasn't happy with the results, so I reworked it and wasn't happy with the results, and I was just like, man, I'm really disappointed, and I felt really disappointed. And I reflected on myself, and I was like, this isn't right. It's not right to be disappointed. I have to achieve submission to God. If God didn't want to help me with this music, that's his choice, and he's the creator, so his choices matter. His choices are important, and I have to submit to all of his decisions. And that's the conclusion I came to after reflecting on myself based on my knowledge of God's words, and based on what's actually in line with my disposition, and my pursuit, because I pursue to be someone who achieves submission to God under all circumstances, but it wasn't my first reaction to submit to God when my music wasn't coming out that great. And so after I told God, it's okay, I understand, you didn't want to help me with this music or whatever, and, it's fine. I still love you and everything, and I want to submit to you, and, after I told him that, the next day, I started working on some music, on a project, really, and produced Be Perfect and Upright. Very happy with how that came out. And I thought, okay, God's timing is not my timing. He decided to help me. And it wasn't the first two projects I worked on, because like, we can't expect immediate results. Like God says, don't be impatient for results. Sometimes if God decides to help you, it'll be a little bit later on. So you just have to be patient and submit to God in the meantime. And then when he does help you, you have to submit to that too, and be thankful and have gratitude in your heart towards God. And yeah, so I guess that's it. So thank you so much for watching. May God's will be done in your life, and goodbye.